Hey guys, this is just one guy, and this is my tutorial series, Unity for Noobs. Now in this episode, we're continuing on with the multi-platform RPG project, and we're going to do player targeting in this one, which means we're going to create our first enemy, and we're going to target them. Now, I want to make apologies for last week. I wasn't able to release any videos because my internet was out, and I just couldn't upload anything. And then I downloaded the new Unity beta and decided to start trying that because it has new features, and it didn't work well with my recording software, so it's still kind of messing up. So if you see any glitches, that's kind of what it is. Okay, now let's get into it. First we have to create our enemy, and the first thing we're going to do is just duplicate the player, because the player is essentially going to be the enemy, just with a few different scripts that we'll add later on. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we can use the player. Now we're just going to erase the name and name it enemy. And we're going to go inside it and delete the third person camera because the enemy doesn't need a camera. Now we're going to come up here and we're going to remove the player controller script. I have two on just for because I use one for demonstration purposes, but you should only have one. Now we have an enemy that has a character script, our nav mesh agent, our rigid body animator, and just our mesh and collider. Now to if you duplicated it, it should be like that, but you should move the enemy back just so you can actually see it. Now go to the RPG game and go to prefabs and create a new material. And what we're going to do is name this enemy color. And we're going to go into the albedo and the shader part and change it to red. Now we're going to drag this onto our enemy so we can tell which one is the enemy and which one is the player. Okay, next we're going to go into scripting. Now we're going to be changing two scripts, I believe, maybe. I may have already wrote this part in the last tutorial. But what you want to write is a bool called isPlayer in the character script, and a bool called isEnemy. Make them public because we're going to need to access them from other scripts. And we're just going to create a public transform target. Now I might have done this in the last tutorial, but I'm not for sure, so I'm just going over it just in case. That's just a public bool called isPlayer, a public bool called isEnemy, and a public transform called target in the character script. Now for the main script that we're going to be working on, the player controller script, and this is going to be the actual script that's going to allow us to target the enemy. Now what we're going to do is we want to tell, give a little demonstration here. What we want to do is we want to fire a raycast from the camera, and the first one we fire is going to give us our point, the place that we want to go or the place that we hit. Now we already done that in the last tutorial in the movement script, and if you didn't see it, you should go back and check out that tutorial first. But after we get that point, what we're going to do is fire a second raycast to tell what we hit. Now in this one, we're just going to detect whether we hit the player, the enemy, or nothing at all, which will be the floor. Later on, we may change it to the nav mesh depending on how things go, but more than likely, we just want to know what we hit. Okay, and this one the second raycast is just going to come from the camera and detect whether we hit the player or the enemy or the floor. Okay, and this is the function that does it. It's called check enemy, and it takes a vector 3. Now the vector 3 is that first raycast we fire to get which point we hit, and then this is going to fire the second one, which is going to check exactly what we hit. The first one is going to get the point of where we hit, and the second one is going to get what we hit. Okay, let's just write this. Well, before we write this function out, we just got to write a couple of variables. Well, actually one variable, which is public bool called hit enemy. And this will just allow us to tell whether we hit the enemy or not. Now later on we might want to change that, but for right now that's just good enough. Now we're going to write the function, which is void check enemy. I believe that's what I called it. just go down here to make sure. Enemy check, sorry. And this will just check if we hit the enemy or not. Okay, as I said before, it takes a vector 3, which is going to be the original point that the raycast hit, and we're going to name that point, what was it, point something, point hit. Okay, and now what we want to do is create a raycast hit, and this is going to give us our information on what essentially the raycast hit, and the type of raycast we're using is a line cast. The difference between a raycast and a line cast is the raycast cast from whatever you want it to cast from in a direction, and the line cast from point to point. So what we're going to say is if physics.linecast, and it takes a start and an end, as you can see here. So the start position is going to be the camera, and we have to get the transform of the camera, and we have to get the position of the transform, because it takes 2 vector 3s. The second vector 3 is going to be the point hit, which is right here. And of course we need the raycast hit to get our information. Oh, mistyped that. A minute, meant to type out, and then hit. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is check if we hit the enemy. Now we say if if hit.transform, because that'll be the hit. That'll be what we hit, and that'll be the transform of what we hit. Dot get component, because we want to make sure it has something on it. Dot oops, sorry, doesn't write like that in C# character, because the character script is going to be on the enemy, and we want to check if it is it an enemy, is enemy. Okay, oh, right here, and if it is the enemy, what we want to say is hit enemy equals true. And now if the raycast just hits the floor, it's going to return nothing, so we're just going to say else, because if it hits something, then it's not going to call this code down here. So if it hits something, we just check if it's the enemy, and it'll be hit enemy. And later on, I guess when we go online, we'll put whether it hit the player or not. But that's going to take some extra coding online anyway, so we won't get into that right now, because I want this tutorial to be pretty self-contained. But if it just hits the floor or something, it's not going to hit. It's just going to return false. So what we want to do is put hit enemy equals false, because we didn't hit the enemy. And I'll go over why we want it to be false specifically in a minute. I believe I'm missing. Let me just check. Yeah, okay, there it is. Now we go up here to the code, and we just have to first we have to copy this, and what we're going to say now, this is important to note. Right now we just want the player to move towards the enemy no matter what, but in later tutorials we're going to change that, because we don't want in later tutorials we're going to be doing things like firing fireballs and arrows and stuff like that, and we're not going to want the player to just move directly towards the enemy. But since this is a self-contained tutorial, I just want the player to move towards the enemy or the spot no matter what. So we're just going to put the enemy check code under it, so he can move towards the enemy or move towards the spot that you want him to go to no matter what. And since it takes a vector 3, the vector 3 is going to be the first raycast we hit. So we put ray.getPoint, and what we put is ray distance. It takes that that variable ray distance, and now if we hit the enemy, we don't want to instantiate the marker object. And if you don't know what the marker object is, the marker object is that little square we create that let us know where the player is headed towards. But if we hit the player, we don't want to create that. We might want to do something later, like change the player's color so we know which one we're chasing. But for right now, we don't want to do anything but print the player's name, which I forgot to put in there. Actually, I forgot to put two parts. But right now, since we don't want to create the hit marker object, we're just going to put if hit enemy false. Now that's the only way to create the mark object. So when we hit the player, it won't create the mark object. If we hit the floor, if we hit the floor, it'll create the mark object. But if we hit the player, it won't create it. Now I've got two parts over here, which is print the enemy's name, because that's going to be our test for right now, since we don't want the enemy to actually do anything. Which is the enemy's name is going to be hit dot transform. Oops, spelled it wrong. Hit dot transform dot name, and that's just going to print a little enemy in the corner. Also, what we want to do is, this is going to be super helpful right now, but we want to get the enemy's transform, and that'll be useful for later tutorials. So we'll go, character. Is it character.target? Yeah, character.target equals hit.transform. Because later we're gonna want to get information and stuff about the enemy we hit, so that'll be useful for later. But right now, if we hit the enemy, we want to print the name, and for hit enemy to come true, and if not, we don't want it to come true. Now let's go back up here. This code is for running if we have a controller or if we are a PC, but we want this to run on Android too. So we have to come down here, copy our enemy check function, and just put it right here underneath the character, move the point. And of course, the Android takes a different type of array, which is the touch ray. So, touch ray, that get point. And that's the same thing. We don't want to create that marker object if we hit the enemy. So we're just going to put if hit enemy is false. That's when we want to create the marker object. And almost done. Let's just compile. Now, last time I tried to cut this compiling out, but it froze and messed up the recording equipment. And since I don't want that to happen again, I'm just going to leave it in. Okay, we're done. Now one more thing we have to do is go to our enemy, go to his character script, and his player is going to be checked if you duplicated it like I did, but check is enemy. Now we're going to go to the player, make sure the player controller script is on, make sure all the variables are, sorry, I was using the wrong script. Make sure that's the actual player controller, and this is the one I use for show. But of course yours will only have one player controller, but you want to make sure all these variables are set up the same way I have them. If you're not for sure, you can go back to the other tutorials and watch it from the beginning and set up this player controller the way I have it. Now all we want to do, there's no setup. Let's just hit play. And as you can see, I'm messing up already. There's something wrong. Let me just figure this out. Okay, I wrote something wrong. Let me just check it and see what it is. Player pre-controller, enemy check. If line cast is enemy. Else hit enemy false. Pretest on my controller. Character. Let me just hit play again and test that out. Make sure everything's right. Okay, we've definitely done something wrong. And I have no idea what it is. Let's just check up here and see, because he's not creating. Okay. And we forgot to hit the false sign. It was a bit scary because I had no idea what I programmed wrong. Just a little error there. I forgot. it was saying hit enemy. If hit enemy was true, don't create the mark object, which I meant to put if hit enemy was false, but I forgot to type the question mark. Well, the exclamation mark. Okay, let's hit play again. And you can see if I click the ground, nothing. He's creating a mark object. But if I click the enemy, hit enemy equals true, and he prints the enemy's name right there. And now we can tell whether we hit the enemy or not. And right here, I'm not hitting the enemy. Here, he knows I hit the enemy. He didn't create the mark object, yet he still went towards the enemy, and everything is functioning fine. If we don't, we're creating a mark object, and this will work the same on our phone. Let's just make sure we hit that exclamation point on the phone code too, which we did. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I should go back to my normal schedule of posting around 3 o'clock from now on. That's it. Thank you for watching.